So let's talk about one of the more feel-bad moments in Warhammer 40K, when you suddenly lose a unit or the game to a special rule that you didn't even know existed. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're having a bit of a talk about gotcha moments in Warhammer 40K, where we'll be talking about what they are, a few common examples, why it's not particularly good for the game, and a few ways to try and avoid them when you are taking to the tabletop yourself. So I imagine the majority of people watching this will have heard the term before, though I don't think that everyone will. So let's just have a quick recap. Gotcha, or basically I got you, is where one player is suddenly surprised by a really powerful rule that they didn't have any idea was coming. In Warhammer 40k they'll tend to know their own rules at least fairly well, so it'll usually tend to be a rule in their opponent's army, typically something that breaks the standard game rules in some sort of way, either shooting out of sequence, moving out of sequence, or putting together a crazy stack of combos that they didn't know existed. And in Warhammer 40k, stratagems are perhaps the most common culprit. Even if you do happen to know the exact way that all of your opponent's units function, you might not know literally every single stratagem they have access to, so it's not too unexpected that they might surprise people. Typically I'd say things that really define things as a gotcha moment, rather than just not really knowing the rules, is if the one player has clearly just made a move that is a blatant misplay if they hadn't known that the rules existed. Perhaps the most obvious example could be Space Marine's Auspex scan, the one that allows them to intercept and shoot a unit that's come out of deep strike, provided they've set up too close to them. If the opponent forgot about the rule or didn't know it existed in the first place, it's quite clear that most of the time they really shouldn't set up a weak unit within shooting range of the Space Marine unit, as if they do it's basically instantly dead for no reward whatsoever, so that would often be a gotcha moment, with the Marine player not giving any friendly hints that that will be what's going to happen, and instead just taking the painful consequences of their opponent making a misplay. Honestly, with all the stratagems and powerful rules that there are out there are really quite a lot of opportunities for gotcha moments in 40k, though I would say that ones that break the way that the game and turn usually works are some of the biggest. Auspex scan or other intercept type abilities, where you instantly get to shoot something that came out of deep strike, obviously have quite a lot of potential, as it obviously makes a big difference to your positioning if you know that your squad has a chance of getting intercepted or not. Perhaps the other biggest example are things that give you a surprise movement or a surprise charge, say Custodian's jet bikes using stooping dive, which allows them to charge in the opponent's fight phase, and if the other player doesn't know that it's coming, then they might lose their own charging units before they even get to fight as a result. Maybe Admech Cerberus Raiders using Tactica Obliqua, your opponent thinking that they might be able to charge them, and then them falling back to make that pointless. Perhaps pre-game redeployment moves. If you're playing against Ultramarines or Craftworld Eldar, you could be quite surprised when your opponent redeploys a significant amount of their army turn 1 if you didn't see it coming. And also special rules that can give you a surprising heroic intervention when you're not expecting it, things like Black Templar's Devout Push, or anything else that can allow a surprise combat phase even if you hadn't even charged the unit that you were standing right next to. Even things that are just really big damage or durability buffs can be a big deal as well. Say you might have calculated that your squad could probably take out the enemy unit in close combat, but if they suddenly pull a stratagem that makes them far more durable out of thin air, then things could end surprisingly badly for your charging unit. Some Chaos Psychers also have the opportunity to switch out psychic powers on them as well, suddenly getting a new and very powerful effect, such as maybe suddenly generating Death Hex to kill some invul saves, and that could be another really big surprise move if your opponent didn't think that that was possible. The examples are near endless, but if you have got anything else that's really caught you out in a recent game, then please feel free to share in the comments below so other people won't fall foul of it. In general, I think that gotcha moments are a much bigger problem in 8th and 9th edition 40k than they were in previous editions. Because Games Workshop keep on releasing more and more in-depth content for all of their armies, it means the sheer size of the rules are bigger than they ever were before, and it means that even the very best players in the world are unlikely to know every single facet of every single army. I think that's particularly true in terms of stratagems. You might be familiar with the most played ones out of every faction, but there's still room for more niche ones to crop up and surprise you that you hadn't seen in play before. It's far more true of people who are starting to get into 40k, who of course aren't really going to be familiar with many factions besides their own, allowing this to happen far more often. I think they're best avoided if you possibly can in gameplay. It can make it very unsatisfying for both players if the outcome of a game of 40k is basically decided because somebody didn't know one rule, whether that's yourself or the person who's playing against you. It can be pretty painful to be on the receiving end of a surprise rules twist like this, but it can also not be the most satisfying for both players either. After all, there's not that much satisfaction in winning a game if the only reason that you really won was because the other player did something that they really shouldn't have done if they'd known the full picture. If you're feeling nice, you can often be lenient with opponents, such as say, are you sure you want to deploy there? I do have Auspex scan. But in several other situations, it might just not be that easy to do takebacks. Say if you've charged one of your assault units into melee, you've already done your attacks, and then you didn't realise your opponent had a stratagem that could easily kill your melee unit after they've fought. You can't really take back the whole manoeuvre, even if your opponent was inclined to, as you've already attacked and done your damage. In general, I do think that small gotcha scenarios are going to come up quite regularly in 40k, and to an extent it is certainly part of the game, trying to know other armies and exploit their weaknesses while deploying your own most powerful tricks. I think to a certain level they're really not the biggest deal. I just personally want to try and avoid things that are going to twist the entire game and make all the rest of the tactical struggle completely meaningless. I think a lot of gotcha things can certainly be mitigated by a good pre-game discussion. Generally when I talk through an army list, I do try and talk through the stratagems that I'm likely to use for each unit as well, or at least the ones that break the normal flow of the game. For example, in that last YouTube related tournament that I played, I made sure to mention that my Sanguinary Guard could heroic intervene 6 inches, and my Cerberus Raider Cavalry could run away when they're charged, just when I was talking through the units and roughly what they did. That way it means that your opponent is informed, and they have the chance to ask any other questions and understand the rule before it actually comes up in game, as opposed to having annoying feel-bad moments in the game itself. It's not like you have to outline your entire battle plan, just mention a few of the moves that your units might potentially do. Of course, you're going to be wanting to avoid the same thing happening to you as well, and it can often help to ask a few basic questions about your opponent's army. Say, asking before the game, can you redeploy any units? Do you have any abilities to shoot things that come out of deep strike? And do your units have any moves that could make a surprise charge out of sequence, such as getting heroic intervention? At the very least, I'd certainly make note of the opponent's relics, powers and warlord traits, and how they might interact, and just have a quick think about how they might stack on their different units, so you're a bit less surprised when things happen in game. You can also ask a few more general questions about abilities. Say, with all of its abilities, can this unit make a charge on this unit per turn, or what's its maximum effective charge range? I think the vast majority of players will be happy to tell you that information. I don't think Warhammer is really supposed to be a game about withholding knowledge from your opponent, particularly when the rules have quite so much content, which most players don't own the entirety of. In general, when moves are actually happening, unless you're in some sort of hyper-competitive tournament game or something, I think it's usually polite to just check the opponent's knowledge before a certain move is made rather than after. Say if the enemy is moving into heroic intervention range of a unit that doesn't normally have it, it's kind of polite just to remind them that they have that ability, so they have the option to either go in there and take the hit, or adjust their positioning accordingly. Despite all this, it will happen from time to time anyway. A lot of the time it really doesn't matter too much, and most people will be chilled about themselves having made a mistake and learn for the future. But if it really is going to be game-changing or a big deal, then I'd certainly consider allowing my opponent to take back their move if it's reasonably doable. Obviously the whole context is pretty important. If you're playing a lot more competitively, then it's more generally seen that you should be trying to anticipate those situations, and you are genuinely making a mistake if you fall into them. But in the vast majority of other games, I think it makes sense to be a bit more chilled. So anyway, let me know what you think about gotcha moments in 40k. I'm sure everyone will have their own stories to tell about this, when very bad things have befallen yourself or your opponent with rules that weren't known. So please let me know down in the comments below. I'll certainly look forward to having a read. If you've enjoyed the video and would like to see more like it, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I do try and keep regular 40k stuff coming pretty much every day. Finally, if you have been watching the videos on the channel quite a lot, I would just like to mention that I do have a Patreon page, and you can find it down in the video description below. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, such as seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next for the channel, and automatic entry to the channel's monthly prize giveaways, with a chance to win some big model kits every month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, then the link is down in the video description below. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.